Babe, new Smogon tiering survey just dropped. Yeah, it's really bad over there. Welcome back, Wolfpack. Verlis here, and let's see what's going on over at Smogon because they've been doing some tiering surveys, haven't released the data, but now we can finally see what has been going on with the teal mask, with all of these bans, with the new tiering action that I've been talking about, and it's actually not doing anything, so the competitiveness has increased. But remember, bar graphs can easily be deceptive, so it went from 4 to 5.5. That's still a failing grade, and then we just kind of see this cope and justification for the over decade of horrible decisions from Smogon just making the format unplayable. So competitiveness started at an all-time low point when DLC was released due to the influx of new, potentially unbalanced Pokemon and standards not yet being formed. I mean, I guess, but that doesn't really explain anything because that's happened for other Pokemon games, and it's also happened other times this generation where we also saw competitiveness and satisfaction go down. However, with each piece of tiering action as time elapsed justifying their terrible ban decisions, the metrics grew closer to generational norms, reaching roughly that point in the most recent survey. So the generational norm is around a 6 out of 10. That is the best Smogon can hope to achieve, but also with like the crazy amounts of bans we've seen for Generation 9, also the same thing with Generation 8, they have not done anything to make a more balanced, competitive, or enjoyable metagame for Pokemon. Verlisify always right, Smogon always terrible. But of course, they talk about the qualified players. Worth noting that the qualified player base slightly below the general player base in this metric across each survey, but the same progression is plotted. So the broader Smogon player base finds it to be slightly more playable than the babies that have just over-dedicated to Smogon and just want everything banned 24/7. This shows some things to me as tier leader. Releases like Home and DLC continue to leave the tier reset to a low point in terms of competitiveness. That's because you kids have no idea what you're doing, and you're not even playing real Pokemon anymore. So when you get a fresh batch of Pokemon that isn't banned, you don't know what to do. And then that just kind of goes into a flavor of the month thing that forces a ban, but also because every time something pops up and the meta is never allowed to develop, because Smogon players are too unskilled and casual to actually apply game comprehension and meta development to make counter picks and do anything. They just cry and say, over-centralizing, no counters, even though those arguments are easily debunked, and I've debunked them dozens of times. They just do that until the thing is banned, so again, when like more threats come in, well now the power level's suppressed, Pokemon just keeps on moving and advancing without Smogon, and then everything becomes destabilized. But they're trying to like spin towards like, the new Pokemon, you know, power creep and all that, DLC, it just means the game is bad, and we're just trying to salvage it with our bans, when really it's the other way around. These circumstances demand prompt council attention and tiering action. So it's, oh, everything's getting worse with our format, which means more bans! That's the only way we can solve it. More bans and faster bans, and that's what I talked about in my last Smogon video, where they're talking about just like upping the tiering action and doing like more suspect tests, and more council quick bans and decisions if needed to try to stabilize before the Indigo Disc, and then try to go for like the long game where like months into next year, that's when no new Pokemon being introduced, DLC's done, that's when Smogon will finally be playable. We addressed this during DLC with more frequent surveys than Home and more organization communication than ever before, which avoided a disconnect between the player base and the council like we had with Volcarona. That's completely wrong because my last video was just kind of showing that OU had a complete meltdown because King Gambit didn't get banned, because King Gambit is keeping Dragapult in check, and there's also King Gambit keeping Golden Go in check, but then everyone's mad because they're saying, well, if King Gambit needs to be banned, ban them, and then we can ban the other two threats if they get out of hand, instead of leaving King Gambit to hold down other threats, but that's how the meta works. So just like, yeah, these kids have no idea how to develop, they can't play Pokemon, so now they just need like ban after ban after ban. And if it's not the right thing being banned, everyone complains because you've just made a super bratty and childish metagame that can't even achieve any balance or more competitiveness than regular Pokemon. Congratulations. We also came up with some creative solutions, like shorter deadlines for surveys and suspects, which were previously unprecedented and allowed us to get more things accomplished in less time as the tier shifted rapidly. So again, like instead of letting things play out, instead of unbanning, giving more tools to kind of elevate the power creep so everything's keeping itself in check, no, we have to like hyperspeed, warp speed these bans now because Pokemon bad. There is a correlation between our tiering actions and improved perception of the metagame. However, there's still a lot to do and more improvement to come across, meaning our job is still ongoing and you need to expect more tiering action. So because we see a slight increase from bad to still horrible, that means the bans are working. Even though the bans haven't been working, because you just scroll up in this and you find some like other tiering action to where, yeah, the game has never really felt good. So how enjoyable do you find it? Qualified, less enjoyable, general, slightly more enjoyable, but still a 6.5 out of 10. Terrible. And this post goes back to April, so this is when we just kept like seeing an onslaught of Generation 9 Pokemon bans. Pokemon Home came in later with May, and that had the immediate quick ban of Spectrier and Regieleki, also Urshifu being banned, and then like the Volcarona. I don't know the timeline of all this, but all it shows like it's just a mess of bans, and instead of like being able to have reverse sweepers or counters, so just no, stripping power until the next thing becomes a problem, banning it, and then just working your way down because there's no encouragement from Smogon to actually develop any kind of skill inside of Pokemon, even though that's also in the Smogon philosophy. And I keep bringing this up. Definitions for tiering policy. Skill. Team building skill. Assessing and dealing with threats. This has been completely stripped from Smogon players because now they just like assume if anything's a problem, it's going to get banned. And now because we have the council, just cry and do the surveys until it gets quick banned. Also, it's always been a very small amount of players that are kind of influencing these decisions, even going back to the suspect test where it's 100-something people that decide if a Pokemon gets banned or not, sometimes just by a couple of votes, and then that's going to affect tens of thousands of players, and then it spills outside of Smogon because Smogon players are toxic and aggressive, and they will bully you for not playing by their rule set. And then we also have the elites, the qualified players. So 129 people that get more weight inside their decisions, and then that's just a justification for more bans instead of actually developing what Smogon has historically considered skill. Building towards a strategy, catering to metagame or opponents. But now it's, no, I don't want to change my team. I don't want to adapt. I don't want to have to find counters. Anything outside of OU is garbage, and it means I shouldn't have to pick up that Pokemon, even though tiers have nothing to do with a Pokemon's power, just usage. So like flavor of the month, everyone being an NPC, just copying each other, and again, not developing anything, and now we can see a decade of that, and Smogon players are just unskilled brats. Cool. And then the competitiveness back in April, again, like we got rid of all the big threats. We don't have to worry about Palafin. We don't have to worry about Annihilate or Chi-Yu. Oh, it's a 6.15 out of 10 or 5.75. So again, like, yeah, barely any better, and then like new Pokemon come in, you keep banning, and it just keeps going down. Smogon has been around for over 15 years. We have countless bans and tiering actions, tons of experience. We have the council and all of this other stuff, many generations, especially like competitive development, as Pokemon got more and more competitively recognized from like Generation 6 onward, and the best they can do is a 6 out of 10-ish no matter what. Enjoyability is an interesting metric as it's not the true goal of tiering. That's just a straight up lie because every decision from Smogon has been about comfort. Two Pokemon being asleep is frustrating, evasion's frustrating, OHKO is frustrating, this like super powerful meta Pokemon that we have to lie about and give Stealth Rocks and a free stat boost and Aurora Veil to justify it being banned. You know, it's not cool when I get swept by it sometimes, therefore it needs to be removed. And then like all these other alt strategies and flavor of the month things that have popped up. No, it's all about comfort and catering to players that refuse to adapt. It's always been about making the game more enjoyable, but then they pretend they're making it competitive, even though by stripping so much from the game, they've just made a purely casual format, but then their philosophy is about being like toxic and elitist. But it is what many people desire out of the game as a hobby, so I like seeing these numbers improve personally. I mean, there seems to be a really close correlation when it comes to Pokemon of enjoyability and competitiveness. That if it's feeling uncompetitive and like just unplayable and stuff, well then you're not having fun, you're not enjoying it, even if you're just like copying meta teams or trying to like hard anti-meta to gain some elo or laddering. But if like everyone's having fun, it's more diverse, you can kind of run whatever, and then there's still like creative strategy play because the power level's balanced out. But yeah, more enjoyable is just going to feel more competitive. And that goes back to like, again, just banning all of the RNG things and things that don't feel fun, like double sleep. Smogon players, especially the Council, especially Finch, they are too unskilled to understand anything about like what they're doing and how Pokemon functions. I am not going to provide as much commentary on them, but I did make progressive charts to show how it shifted and how it can be seen below. So yeah, like didn't really like go straight up, but has ended kind of higher. But then the general enjoyability was like, hey, we got some new Pokemon, we're playing around, it's a little bit of a shakeup, that's cool. And then it kind of settled and got ugly, and then the bans were just like, yeah, it was about where it was. So like instead of again letting things develop, it just forced bans. Hope you enjoy it now that all the things you're crying about go away. Finally, I want to log some numbers on the specific tiering target questions when we list Pokemon, and it's just always like the qualified players are just like, nope, it's less enjoyable, less competitive, this needs to be banned, ban everything, it always skews higher. So it just kind of like shows that people that are overly dedicated to Smogon, that's it. They just want to remove whatever beats them, but it's always been that way. And I identified that back in Generation 4 when they banned Garchomp, which wasn't even that big of a problem back then. Also, you have to consider that Smogon has been hemorrhaging market share since Generation 6 because they just keep making all of these laughable decisions, and then even though like, okay, maybe the first couple bans feel competitive and are more enjoyable for a generation, I didn't want to deal with some of those megas anyways, then they just start becoming like a parody of themselves, and it just becomes a ban culture instead of a culture to make the game more competitive. That's it. When you have a ban culture, it's not about, hey, how do we make the metagame more enjoyable, more competitive? It's what do we ban next? And it's uncompetitive until we ban that next thing. Smogon really started becoming a joke and losing a lot of its prestige in Generation 7, where it's just like, wait, none of these bans are really making sense, and that's just kind of weird. And then became a complete joke when they banned Dynamax, because it just kind of shows these players refuse to adapt. They are unable to adapt. They cannot play real Pokemon anymore. And then Generation 9, also Generation 8, have just been the generations of like non-stop bans and the banning culture that we've seen. So it's like, yeah, we don't have a lot of responses, like justifying all these decisions. So it's going to actually skew higher in ban favor because the only people that are left are the people that can't play real Pokemon and just want everything banned. Ogerpon Hearthflame was quick banned via a council vote on September 22nd as a result of the survey. So we can also see that, like, that's what this is. These surveys are the new suspect tests, and it's kind of the same to where it's just like, yeah, we can get some input from, you know, everyone, but we're really only going to pay attention to qualified, and then we're going to say, like, hey, if we did a suspect test, this is probably what would have happened anyway, therefore we can just quick ban everything and keep banning everything. Wait a second. September 20th to October 16th, enjoyability went down with Ogerpon being removed. How could that be? And then we see some other Pokemon and some other data. King Gambit's kind of weird because it got slightly more favorable to like not ban for general, but then became more want to ban for qualified. And I guess like the qualified players are going to be lower here because they're the ones that are like making the arguments of, hey, even though this Pokemon's everywhere and it's a problem and should probably be banned, it'll create more problems being banned than not being banned. But again, not having enough self-awareness to realize that is the entirety of Smogon, that all they've done is remove Jenga pieces and now it's impossible to stabilize. Regular players don't have as much of a problem with Roaring Moon, and then as you can see, even though we keep seeing like bans and calls for bans, Pokemon only become more and more problematic. But also I think that, again, this is just like, oh, the player base is bleeding out, so it's only the people that just want everything they can't deal with or don't want to deal with banned. And then, like, as a Pokemon becomes more and more frustrating, no, it's not about adaptation, it's not about team building or meta development, just get it out of here. And now that we've seen the promise from the council to take action sooner, to do more surveys, to do more suspect tests, to have, like, less time to make these decisions, it's only one of those things like, yeah, why isn't this banned, or why isn't this getting suspected, or why don't we deal with this problem? So yeah, as such, SVOU Tiering Council voted today if we intended to quick ban suspect or not act on Gliscor. Stay tuned elsewhere for the results. That's up to date with surveys. So Smogon's trash. It's always been trash, and none of their decisions are making it any better because it's a completely flawed system that I've been talking about for over a decade now, because my original Smogon video goes back to October of 2013. So I can officially say over a decade of Verlisify always right. Sick. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you all have a nice day. Thank you very much for watching.